Hello everyone, welcome to Middle Fantasy. I am your host Zack, and today you're going to be looking at a bunch of people asking the question, why fantasy? I put this question out a while ago at the beginning of the month. Actually, it's been something that I've been thinking about since I had a random person ask me, why fantasy? And for me, what it comes down to the fantasy community is a very passionate community. And we all have a lot of different thoughts and feelings, especially when it comes to fantasy. So I put the question out, why fantasy? And now you're going to be hearing a lot of amazing people asking and answering that question in their own words. Well, I'm not going to keep explaining it. Why don't they tell you why they love fantasy?
Hello, everyone. This is Charles and Dylan from the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast, and we're here today to answer the question, why do we like fantasy? So, Dylan, why do you like fantasy?
Well, Charles, the main reason I love fantasy is that I'm interested in stories about people, psychology, and human nature, and I think fantasy provides unique opportunities to tell those kinds of stories. Fantasy authors can ask and explore important aspects about people in unique ways by pushing beyond the limitations of the laws of nature. For example, a character like the Lord Ruler in Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson allows us to take a look at how a person who's been supernaturally kept alive and in power for generations can come to be seen as more of a force of nature than a person, as well as how much courage and perhaps foolhardiness it takes for our protagonist to even consider standing up to the Lord Ruler. A similar story about trying to overthrow a ruler without these magical elements just can't hit the same notes for me. And also, I like fantasy because dragons are cool.
Dragons are indeed cool, and I would agree, exploring human nature through elements of the fantastic and exploring human psychology is a top reason for me too. And no surprise that you, as a psychology student, would go in that direction as well. Is one of the reasons that I love fantasy is the community, being able to speak to everyone on social media has been super supportive. We've gotten to speak to authors. We've gotten to collaborate with people like Zack to do all kinds of fun projects. And it's just been a really good time.
Yeah, everyone I've got an opportunity to interact with over on Twitter, Insta, Facebook, over email, all that kind of stuff. It's been amazing. A pleasure to be part of this community.
Yep. And it's also a pleasure that we get to talk fantasy and I get to talk fantasy with you, Dylan.
The feelings are mutual, Charles.
Thanks, everybody.
Hello, Middle Fantasy fans. This is Alex from A Hero's Journey podcast, and I'm very excited to participate in the Why Fantasy collaboration with Zack. And I read fantasy for a lot of different reasons. First and foremost, because I just enjoy the genre and the different way authors design and tell stories. And with a quick tour through my little bookshelves back here, I'm going to show you why. I pulled one book from each shelf. I have 7 shelves, if you count the little top one, my TBR pile. So I read fantasy for different characters, experiencing different cultures, the mysteries we have in books, the plots of books, excellent prose, for pure fun or enjoyment, or for some amazing world building. All of those different things can be found in whatever fantasy books you want. For me, those are the aspects of these books that I like the most, but you can find most of those aspects in any fantasy book. And really, with all of that available in fantasy, the question shouldn't be, why do you read fantasy? Rather, why not read fantasy? Thanks, guys. I can't wait to see everyone else's responses. And thanks, Zack, for putting this all together.
Hey, BookTube, it's V, and today we are talking about what fantasy means to me. I've always thought that fantasy worlds are much more interesting and captivating than real life. I love that I can escape to a new world by just picking up a book or watching a movie, and that I can always put it down when I need to hop back onto reality. For those of us who can't travel right now, it is the world's most on-demand and cheap vacation. In fantasy books, I think that the characters have a lot more control over their destinies than people in real life do. Magic is a great equalizer, especially when in a lot of these stories, you just have a regular run-of-the-mill person who turns out to be a hero, and suddenly they have superpowers instead of just being like a normal person, and that's really reassuring. I think that deep down, we all really just want to feel special, and we want to be worth telling a story about. So we project ourselves onto the heroes in these stories just so we can be part of the group. I love how I can just come along for the ride, especially when it's something special going on that I would never be able to do in real life. I'll never get to ride a dragon in real life. I'll never get to go to a pub with a bunch of dwarves and drink them under the table, and then deal with that creepy stranger out in the corner who's just staring at us the entire time. I'll also never just walk away from my job and go on an adventure in real life. But with fantasy, I can just live vicariously through the characters and check all that stuff off of my bucket list anyways. I'm V from Caffeinated Covers, and thank you so much for watching and for including me in this collaboration.
Why fantasy? It's like asking, why do you like using your imagination? The simple answer is because it's fun. Fantasy can take you to brand new places that can never exist in reality. It stretches the boundaries of what a story can be. It's almost like playing an interesting board game with a whole lot of rules. Part of the fun is learning the rules and seeing how all the different pieces combined in different ways can create such interesting gameplay. The emotions created from such impossible scenarios is where a lot of the interest and thrill comes from for me.
Why fantasy? Why do you read this genre? This is a question you often get when you read fantasy or sci-fi. No one ever asks why someone would read murder mysteries, political thrillers, or romances. Okay, maybe you get some questions for romance stories, but that more often than not has to do with the quality of the work, and not the genre in itself. Some people would answer this with the vast possibilities that open up when the author can work without limitations to their imagination. This is actually where a lot of bad fantasy comes from. Authors thinking they don't have to follow the rules. But every story has to adhere to its own logic. Fantasy even more so. It is harder for an author to spot logic mistakes they are making because they have not grown up with the logic of their world. From that perspective, I can completely understand the question. So why fantasy? My answer would be, because I read the genres I like, and fantasy isn't one. This answer may confuse you, which I obviously intended, but I should still clarify. I read the genres I like, and fantasy isn't a genre. Now that answer is probably still confusing, but let me explain. What most people think of as a genre is just the way bookshops and libraries sort their books. They know many people don't read fantasy, so they sequester it off to its own section. But that doesn't make it a genre. A genre describes a general plot structure. Fantasy is a type of setting. A combination of setting and genre make a book. I can read a heist story set in Las Vegas or in Scadrial. I can read a crime mystery set in medieval Cologne or in the Vespasian Union. And I can read a politically heavy adventure story set in World War I or in Middle-earth. I read fantasy because I read the genres I like, regardless of setting.
So I was asked, why fantasy? And I would like to share with you guys a little bit of a personal story. So there was a lot of issues going on when I was growing up, and a lot of it had to do with my stepfather. I won't go too far in depth about it, but I think you can probably put the pieces together there. So fantasy for me was an escape. I used video game fantasy more specifically. So games like Bioshock, the series, games like The Last of Us, games like Fallout, Skyrim, Mass Effect, etc. And that was my escape. That allowed me to control all of the mental health issues that I was dealing with. It allowed me to process everything that was going on. And also, it just made me into a better person. Because I feel if I would have allowed my stepdad to really manipulate what was going on, I would have ended up like him. Thankfully, though, with this large array of characters that I've experienced all throughout playing video games, I could experience different emotions. I could experience the happiness, sadness. I could experience empathy. I could experience compassion. And while I was growing up, that really helped. It helped to be able to make me into the person that I am today, as well as things outside of fantasy, i.e., my real life. So, if you have something going wrong with your life, give video games a shot. and see if it can take you away from that for a little bit. It helped me, and I really hope it helped you. Thank you for having me, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Why fantasy? Why do I spend hours reading and reviewing fantasy books? One, because it's fun, but two, because I believe that the fantasy genre has so much to offer. I think some people, maybe uninformed people, think that fantasy is just a bunch of pleasure reading and it's something people just do for fun and there's not a lot of substance to it. I totally disagree with that, and honestly almost offends me a little bit, because done right, and there's so many examples of great fantasy out there, fantasy, the genre, lets you really get a peek into the human condition and what it is to be human. And there's a ton of value there in understanding that. Yes, there are the fun things. There are the dragons and the magic and the wizards and the battles, etc. And the big set pieces. And it's fun to read. There's a lot there. But also, like I said, you can get an insight into characters that I don't think you can see in other genres, because there are really no limits in what you could have in a fantasy story. You can have a character go from the lowest of the low class all the way up to a king or a leader or a queen or a god even. And you can see, what that psyche is, what it would be like to be in those positions. In the fantasy genre, it allows us to explore things that are just, not as possible with the limitations of what we know on Earth here. But without those limits, we're able to see a lot more. And I think a lot of these situations and books are microcosms for things that I see in my life, or as humans, we challenges we run into. And reading fantasy can help you, I don't know, get some more strength, get some more appreciation for what it is to be human, and almost give us more of, I guess, characters to relate to and strength to draw upon. And so for those reasons, I think fantasy is a fantastic genre. It's my favorite thing to read, and it's something that helps me be a better person.
Hey, Zack. We were really pleased to hear your call for aid. So, Rohan Combs. This is Chris and Rose from the Cosmerekats, and we loved the idea of answering why fantasy, because, we're fantasy nerds like you. So
I wanted to send it by Lifeless, but she wouldn't let me.
Well, again, the investiture issue
Gets wonky. Yeah. I heard your question, and the first thing that came to mind was fantasy gets a bad rap for being escapist literature. But honestly, what I love about fantasy is its power to give you a medium and a complexity to think about the world around you in a thorough, detailed, multifaceted way without the burden of having to apply it to reality straight away. Fantasy lets you understand the world around you and be better for the world around you without being sucked into vortex of reality and daily news.
I like fantasy because it's cool. I mean, who doesn't want to ride a dragon or have a pet dragon or,
be a dragon?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because you can have a fantasy whodunit and a fantasy romance and a fantasy thriller. Those kinds of things can all be pulled into the big friendly umbrella of fantasy. And that's also part of it that's fun, is that the fandom is able to embrace a bunch of different types of literature, a bunch of different types of stories.
So basically, we're into fantasy for the ride.
Absolutely.
Wow, that was amazing. I can't believe all the amazing responses. Some of them made me laugh, some of them made me cry, some of them made me tear up a little bit. But in the end of the day, we all love fantasy. I guess now it's my turn to answer the question, why fantasy? For me, fantasy at times can be pure escapism, but not really. I think when it comes to fantasy, you can explore a lot of things when it comes to humanity, and also being able to have, at least with high fantasy, exploring the world, the cultures, the religions, it's more of an exploration of empathy and understanding people more than wizards, dragons, and magic. Magic and wizards and dragons are there as obstacles or sometimes helpful things, but they aren't going to fix all your problems. Yes, there are some books where magic can fix all your problems, but those books can sometimes defeat the purpose of kind of those inner conflicts because, you can have all the power in the world, but if you're a truly broken person, you don't understand what's right from wrong, and you have all these magical abilities, what are you going to do with them? Is kind of the questions that I love, as well as when it comes to it. You can be a simple farmer and then rises up to be a king or a lord or a great mythical warrior, but still have humble beginnings. There's some of the things that I absolutely love about fantasy is you can explore the different genres, as well as you can blend different genres like action and murder mystery or murder mystery with political intrigue and so on and so forth. And for me, I love that, as well as when it comes down to it, just all the people. I think that's why I love fantasy as well, as being able to explore and talk to people around the internet. It really is an amazing experience. And for me, that's why I love fantasy. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This was truly amazing. I have some amazing people. Well, everyone, if you love this video, maybe consider liking and subscribing down below. Subscribe to all the people. There's going to be links to everyone down below. Subscribe to them too. Don't subscribe to me. Just go to everyone else too. Well, thank you all so much. If you have a comment about why do you love fantasy, put it down below. I'd love to read it and just respond and keep this conversation going, because this contribution might be over, but it's never truly over because people are going to keep asking the question, why fantasy? Well, everyone, like always, may your food and drink ever be tasteful. May your books be filled with fantasy and adventure. Bye, everyone. See ya.